these piecewise functions that we're going to work on. So can anybody just raise your hand and tell me, what would you write as the equation of that nice horizontal line that I have in the first picture? Like, what would the equation of that line be? What do you think? Yeah, just y equals -4. If you ever, I use this as a trick, and forgive if I've already said this to you, but if it's a horizontal line, I call it horizontal. It always trips people up because it's parallel to the x-axis, right? But across this line, all these y values are -4, like 1, -4, 2, -4, 3, -4. So when all the y coordinates are the same, it makes a horizontal line. So y equals -4 there. Okay, now just let's do mx plus b form. Can anybody look at that lovely equation? And I'm trying to look at it myself right now. Let's see what the slope is. Okay, can anybody tell me the equation of the line in the second picture? What do you think? It's not -x plus 5, but the plus 5 is right. The slope is kind of tricky there. You're going to find 2 points. Yes, it's really close to 1, but it's actually -4/3. If you're not sure, just grab 2 points that go right through a corner. And there's a couple options on that graph. I'm just going to grab those two. But go from left to right. If you have to go down, then you're going to have a negative slope. So this is down 1, 2, 3, 4, and then over 1, 2, 3. So -4/3 would be the slope there. And then the y-intercept is just crossing at 5, so we know that from looking at the graph. Okay, for the parabola, I'm going to just write this really quick. I'm going to write vertex form for you guys. So that's y equals a, and then times x minus h squared plus k. If you guys remember there, hk is the vertex. And in that format, the h is always, in the actual graph, the opposite of what it looks like in the equation. Okay, now for our purposes for the piecewise, the a value is just going to be either 1 or -1, so you can figure that out from the graph. But these will all be, they'll follow that like that. This will be over 1, down 1, over 1, down 3, over 1, down 5. So it follows that 1, 3, 5 pattern. All right, so since it's turned down, that a is going to be negative. Okay, could you fill in what it would look like in the equation for the h and k? Like, go ahead. Perfect. -2 squared plus 5. Whatever's with the x, it's like the opposite of what it looks like. So it's actually +2 and +5 is the vertex. So the x looks like the opposite. Whatever's on the outside, it's just the y coordinate. If it's a positive number, use a plus. If it's a negative number, use a minus. Okay. Now, last one. We haven't done this for a long time. This is absolute value. This looks very similar to a quadratic in vertex form. It's going to be a on the outside times x minus h in an absolute value, and then plus k. And again, the a is, I'm going to put this in quotation marks, the slope, basically, of the sides of the v, and then hk is going to be the vertex of the v. All right, so if you're at the vertex, you could do this on either side. You're just going up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1, so the a value for that graph is just going to be 1. It'll either be for any of these questions we're going to work on. I don't want to say that because I don't remember if that's the case, but you can find the slope really easily. Just from the vertex, how far up and over, that should be the a value. All right, so if it's just 1, you're not going to see anything in front of the absolute value. How would I fill in like the absolute value and the outside of that based on what you guys see in the picture? What would go inside with the x? And it's very similar to the quadratic. It's the opposite of what it looks like. So let me just jot down the vertex. What does it look like? Looks like -3, -2 is the vertex. How would I plug that in? Yes, so +3. So inside, opposite of what it looks like on the graph, and then outside should just be a copy of the y coordinate. Is anybody having a question? That's the hardest thing you might have to do today, is write an equation of a parabola or an absolute value. So we'll do that actually more on the back. The ones I have on the front, are all going to have just linear pieces. So piecewise function, a function defined in pieces. So they have different pieces on the graph. They can just have 2 pieces. These are mostly going to have 3 pieces. You could have more than 3. You could have 4, 5, 6, whatever. The graphs we're going to work with, I think, for pretty much the most part, just have 3 pieces. So here's what we're going to do. We're basically going to write an equation of each one of the lines that you see in the lovely picture here. And technically it doesn't matter the order that you put them in, but I usually just do it from left to right. Okay, so first thing I would tell you to do is we're just going to do mx plus b form, find the slope of the line. All right, so if I'm looking at this, try to find 2 points that go right through a corner. And could you tell me the slope, just the slope of that first piece? What would you tell me for the slope? Like rise over run. What do we think? It's a fraction. What did you get? 2/3. Good. Okay, so I'm going to just start writing the piece here. So this is 2/3 x. Okay, now, you can do algebra. You could grab 2 points and like go through and write the equation of the line. Here's what I would tell you to do. I'm not going to give you anything that's not a nice number. So if I were to ask you for the y-intercept, we can't see it on the graph, right? Because this piece stops right here. But is there some way I could figure out the y-intercept without doing algebra? What do you think? Exactly, just keep the line going. Okay, so I'm just going to do this with my highlighter. So this is not part of the graph, but that slope is 2/3, right? So on that open circle, which goes right through a corner, just go up another 2 and then over 3. So I'm just continuing the slope, and that touches the y-axis. So then I can see my y-intercept, and then we don't have to go through the whole algebra process. We're just using the slope. So that's going to, if we had the whole line here, it would cross at -1. So that's what I'm going to come over here and write. So when you write a piecewise function, we're going to do this in a couple parts. I'm going to write f of x out in front. This is the same thing as like y equals, okay? Now, there are 3 pieces here. So just kind of I'm going to make a little bitty, put a little brace out in front of this, and we're going to write 3 equations. The first piece, since I have that f of x equals, or if you want to put y equals out in front, that's completely fine. When you actually write the piece, you just start and write what's after the equal sign. So we have 2/3 x minus 1. Okay, and I'm going to put a little comma here, and we'll go back, but you have to actually give a domain for that piece. So let's just write the equation of the pieces to start out, and then we'll go back and do the domain. Okay. Now, my second piece is my favorite because it's just a nice horizontal line. So it should just be y equals a number. So can you guys tell me what that number is? What number am I on for that second piece? Yes. 5. Okay, it's okay to talk. I know it's early in the morning. All right. So this little piece right here is part of the line y equals 5. So what you would write here, I'm just literally going to write the number 5. This little horizontal line. All right? And then the last piece here, it's pretty steep. Can you guys tell? Just find 2 points that go right through a corner. Can you tell what the slope of that is? Should be a whole number. It's not a fraction here. It should be 4. You're going up 4 over 1. Okay, now this would be 4x. Now again, in this case, to get my y-intercept, that piece does not cross the y-axis on the actual graph, but we could back it up and figure out if we continued that line where it would cross. Is probably the easiest way to do it. So I'm just going to go backwards. So I'm going to just use my highlighter here. I'm going to go down 4 over 1. And then that way I can just get the y-intercept, what it should be from the graph. So it should just be -8. So then that third piece is 4x minus 8. Okay. Now, I'm going to try and grab a color I have not used yet. All right, so you have to tell me for what part of the domain you're using each piece. All right, so I'm just gonna, and you don't have to do this at all, I'm just gonna draw like a little vertical line where the pieces switch. Okay, so just a little vertical line. So this guy would be x equals -3, and this guy would be x equals 1. So we're going to be using those two values. All right, when you write these, we're going to write an inequality. We're not going to write an interval. So whatever that first piece is, you guys see how that points to the left forever. So that is on the left side of that vertical line where I drew the -3, right? So the way I would write that, if it's going to the left, it's values that are less than. This is an open circle. So I'm just going to say for x values less than -3. That just means left of -3. I'm using that piece. If you really prefer the interval notation, you don't have to do both of these. Usually they're written with an inequality. I'll just write it to the side. The interval would be from -infinity to that would be a parenthesis, -3. If you like the interval, that would go with that. That is not a bracket, that is a parenthesis. Let me round that out. These are typically written with inequality notation though, so that's what I want to use on mine, but I'll show you both so you can see it. Okay, now the second piece is between those two vertical lines. So I'm only using that piece between these two x values. So whatever the smaller x value is, which is -3, that's going to go on the left. Okay, if you have a filled in circle, you actually equal that point. So I'm going to point this to the left, less than or equal to x. X is going to go in the middle here. And it's an or equal to, if you see it, it's solid, so I have the solid circle filled in. So I'm actually using that point when the x value equals -3. Now, when I get over to the 1, we're going to stop using that piece, but it's an open circle, so just a less than, and then this would be 1. So what that's saying is between -3 and 1, I am using that second piece. If you prefer the interval, I'll just write it here. You have a closed circle on the -3, so that would be a bracket, and you have an open circle on the 1, so that would be a parenthesis. And the reason for that is because it would not be a function if we didn't have that, because like on this value here, I have a closed circle, open circle. They can't both be closed because then it would fail the vertical line test. Kind of the same thing here. This one's open and this one's closed, so it doesn't fail the vertical line test, so that's important whether those circles are closed or open. Okay, now the last piece, we're only using it on the right side of where x equals 1. So all those x values are greater than 1. That's got a closed circle. So I would say x is greater than or equal to 1. Greater than goes to the right. If you're not sure, the inequality symbol, like this arrow points to the right, so does that inequality symbol. That first piece, that inequality, or that little piece of the graph points to the left, so the inequality points to the left. That's another way to kind of remember that. If you like the interval notation, this would be from 1 to +infinity. I really want you to try to write the inequality notation, but just so you can see both. Okay, does anybody have a question? Okay, let's try one more. So this, I got another, just 3 lines, and then we'll do some on the back here in a second. I just want to identify the slope and the y-intercept, so just mx plus b. Can you guys tell what the slope of this first piece is? What are we doing here? It's a fraction. Can you tell what the slope of that first piece? Just find 2 points, go from left to right. What do you think? Is it positive or negative? The 3/2 is totally right, but it should be negative. All right, here, the easiest way I can tell you to do that. If you grab 2 points, go from left to right between the points. If you have to go down, then it's a negative slope. If you have to go up, then it's, so if I take this point left to right, I'd have to go down 3/2. So just be careful with that. All right, now, easiest way to find your y-intercept, and I'm not going to give you guys anything weird, just keep the slope going, all right? So I'm just going to use my highlighter. So I'm just going to go down 3 more over 2. where would I cross if I continued that slope? What would your y-intercept be? Perfect, -6. Okay, so I'm going to write f of x, and this is that first piece, -3/2x, and then -6. Okay, let me just do this as we go through here. So this piece stops when the x value is -2. I'm only using it on the left side of that, so when you write your little inequality, if it's a filled in circle, it's going to be less than or equal to. If you see it, it's solid, so it's filled in, solid circle. Less than goes to the left, and that x value is -2. All you have to do. All right. The second piece is nice for us because it actually crosses the y-axis, so we won't have to back anything up to figure that out. We do need to figure out the slope there, though. Can you guys tell what the slope of this second piece is? What do we think? Should be a fraction. 1/2. Perfect. So it'd be 1/2 x. And then you guys can see it touches the y-axis, so we don't have to figure that out. It touches the y-axis at -5. All right, so that second piece, 1/2 x minus 5. I'm going to put a little comma. Okay, now that middle piece that runs between these two x values. The one I already did was x was 2. This one is x is 4. So between the x values of -2 and 4, we're using this piece. Both of these are open circles. So I'm going to have just plain less than symbols for both of these inequalities. So just start with the one on the left, -2 is less than x, which is less than 4. So what that means is I'm running that piece between, x is between -2 and 4. So this really reads x is greater than -2 but less than -4. If you ever have a compound inequality like this, if you've got the proper notation, the smaller number, bless you, should go on the left, bigger number should go on the right, and both inequality symbols should always point to the left. You're just going to have to look at the graph to figure out whether they should have just a plain less than, or if they should have a less than or equal to. Both open circles, so both plain less than. Okay, my favorite, the last piece, is just a nice horizontal line. So you just got to tell me what number that's on. What does that one look like? 6. So literally this, it would just be y equals 6. Okay, no slope, nothing like that. So you literally just write the number 6. So the rest of the graph would just continue to the right forever, and all the y-coordinates would be 6. Now, that circle is filled in, greater than goes to the right. So this is going to be greater than or equal to. And note that arrow points the same direction that that arrow does on the graph. And it's filled in because I have a solid circle there. That's greater than 4 for the x values. Is anybody having a question? Okay, I'm going to give you a couple on the back that are a little bit trickier. Now, this one only has 2 pieces, but one of the pieces is quadratic. So we're just going to write it in vertex form. You don't have to write it in standard form or anything like that. So the first piece is going to be just a line here. So there's only 2 parts to this, 2 pieces. And it switches over when x equals -2. So when we write this, we'll just have 2 pieces. All right. Let's see. Can you guys tell me the slope of that first piece? It's just a line. We're just going to do mx plus b. What's the slope? The first piece. I think. Should be 1/2. Okay. Now, this guy doesn't touch the y-axis. So just grab your pen, pencil, whatever. Just continue the slope. So from that open circle, I'm just going to go up 1/2, and right there it'll cross the y-axis, so you can grab your y-intercept. So that first piece should be 1/2 x minus 2. All right, so let me just come over here, same format. We're just going to have 2 pieces. All right, so my first piece, 1/2 x minus 2. Okay, now that is on the left side, going to the left, where that vertical line x equals -2, less than goes to the left. So I'm going to say x, this is an open circle, so just a plain less than -2. Okay, now, I promise I'm not going to give you anything mean. The A value will either be 1 or -1 if you're working with a quadratic, which we have here. And I'm just going to, you don't have to write this again, but we're just going to write these in vertex form. You don't have to multiply it out and put it in standard form. The A value on this, we're just from that vertex, this is over 1, up 1, over 1, up 3. So for this particular piece, it's going to be just 1. So you're not going to see anything in front of the parentheses. Really what you got to pick out for that quadratic is the vertex. Does anybody feel like they could tell me? It should just be like in parentheses, x plus or minus something squared, and then x, or and then on the outside plus or minus something based on that vertex. What would go inside with the x? You're close. What is the x coordinate? +1. There you go. All right, what's your y coordinate? Also +1. So the actual vertex there is -1, 1. The way the formula is set out is x minus h. So if I plug in -1 to that formula up there, it's minus a -1, so that's why it looks like a +1. So that's tricky, and I probably put a little too much space there. Now, that's the only other piece, so that's literally just on the right side. So that piece is being used for all the x values that are greater than -2, but I'm going to say greater than or equal to because that circle is filled in. So then x greater than or equal to -2. Just 2 pieces for that one. Does anybody have a question? All right. I got 3 pieces here. One of these is an absolute value. So that first P, I'm going to go through and just highlight where it switches over. All right, so I switch between the first 2 pieces at -5, and I switch between the second 2 pieces at x equals 2. All right, now this first piece I think we're going to have to work on to kind of get the y-intercept here. All right, can you guys tell what the slope is of the first piece? Should be -2. Okay, so this is a little bit annoying, so I'm going to have to back this, or continue it really, until I get to the y-axis. So I'm just going to go down 2 over 1, down 2 over 1. Just keep going. And I have to go kind of far to get to it, but it's faster than sitting there and trying to write the equation of the line with algebra. Just use the slope. And I promise I'm not going to give you anything that's not a nice y-intercept. So if you keep that going, just down 2 over 1, down, I'm just making sure I did that right, should cross at -5. So that first piece, you got -2x plus, oh my goodness, -5, fail, -5. And I got a filled in circle. That piece is just being used on the left side of -5, so that's for x values less than or equal to -5. Here, I'm going to rewrite that real quick. Should be -2x minus 5 is the first piece. Okay, the second piece is an absolute value. And can you guys tell? I'll just write it over here. That's the general form. Can you tell what the A value would be for that absolute value? It should be 1 or -1? -1. You're going on from that vertex, you're going down 1 over 1, down 1 over 1 to get the 2 sides. So it's going to start out with you can just put a little negative in front of it. Okay. Now, I got to grab my vertex, which looks like -2, +6. All right, so inside the absolute value, it's the opposite of what it looks like, because it's minus h, so it'd be minus a -2, so it actually looks like a +2 inside here. And then whatever the y-coordinate is, you just copy that outside. So it's +6, so this will be +6. Okay, on this particular graph, these guys are both open circles. So I'm using that absolute value between the x values of -5 and 2. So this should just go -5, just a plain less than x, plain less than and then 2. So that's saying between -5 and 2, we're using that absolute value. And then the last piece, my favorite, just a nice horizontal line. So you just got to grab the number for that last piece. Looks like -1. And that's got a filled in circle, and we're using that to go to the right side of +2. So x, this will be greater than or equal to, because of the filled in circle, 2. Is anybody having a question? Okay, the last thing we're going to do real quick, and I promise this is so easy, but you just have to, I'm going to give you a little definition. So, evaluating a piecewise function. All right, so I'm just going to kind of give you a little example. So, on a graph, let's say I had you, and I gave you like f of 1, and this was the question you had to answer. Okay, here's how you evaluate this. Whatever's in the little set of parentheses, that is the x value they want you to look at, and then your answer is the corresponding y value. So whatever is in the parentheses, you're going to go to that place on the x-axis and then meet the graph, whether you have to go up or down, or it might be right on the axis, and whatever the y value is for that coordinate, that's your answer. So, and it's going to matter when we do this in a second, whether the circle is filled in or not. Oh my goodness. All right, fired on the first question. Let's not do this one because this is not on a nice point. Okay, don't worry about that. I'm not going to give you unnice points. Okay, so we're going to find -2. I'm just going to go down this column. So you just come over to the graph, find -2. You go up and you meet the graph, and we would be on that point right there. So like -2, just meet the graph. You're going to tell me the corresponding y value to that point. So that would literally just be 5. That's all you have to do. If I have 2, so I'm going to go over to 2. Now this is, go ahead. Yes. 6. Fired. 6. Okay. I can't read my own graph. 6. I have the point highlighted correctly. All right. Now, here's the deal. If I go to 2, you actually have 2 options because the piece switches over. Do you think you go with the open circle or the filled in circle? If I'm actually touching that point, should the circle be open or filled in? Filled in, right? The closed circle. So if I'm on 2, I got 2 choices. You go with the filled in circle. So if I go over to 2, make sure I write this correctly. This should be -1. I just used the same graph that we were looking at for the previous example. All right, so if I go to -5, now -5, I'd have 2 choices. So you go with the filled in circle if you have 2 choices. That should be at 5. If I go to 0, so just right at the origin, to meet the graph, I'm going to have to go up to meet the graph, and that would have the point 0,4. So 4 would be my answer for that one. And then I think I got one more, 5. Okay, so if I go over to 5, I would go down here to meet the graph, and it's just at -1. So you're just telling me, they're giving you the x value, you're going to go to the graph and tell the corresponding y value. Does anybody have a question? Okay, I'm going to shut up.